Welcome back in for another edition of Armchair Quarterback. I started to go episode and edition at the same time. But Armchair Quarterback, I'm David Allen, joined as always by Coach Guy Suttle and Rob Root. Each week we talk about our Cleveland County high school football teams. We'll look at some college football and Gardner-Webb. We'll talk about the Carolina Panthers and the NFL. And right now we're going to talk about 16 weeks of glory, 30 years later. Crest and Burns won the state championship in 1994, and that is about an hour-long video commemorating that entire season. It'll be airing on C19 November 9th and 10th. You see the times there, also November 16th and 17th. And then after the 9th, it will be online at C19 TV. So much younger David Allen, you'll see talking about some Cleveland County football in that airing for sure. Let's talk about these two big county games we had this week. Obviously, conference championship on the line in the Burns-Shelby game. Big playoff seedings on the line in the Crest-Kings Mountain game. We'll talk about both of those, but let's start with the Golden Lions taking a trip up to Ron Green Stadium on Friday night when we go to the highlight package. And guys, this is one that looked like Shelby might pull away early. They were up 14-0, and then all of a sudden Burns makes a big play, gets back in the ball game. It's 14-7 at halftime, Coach.
Yeah, and we were kind of keeping up with things and seeing how this game was rocking and rolling. And like you said, you know, it looked like Shelby was just going to escape on them, and Burns made it a ball game. But in the second half, I thought that just going by the score updates that Shelby took control.
Well, you saw the Khalil Foster touchdown. I think it was about a 46-yarder. This is the interception return for Shelby. Derek Key on that one went about 55 yards, and right there, Shelby's up 14-0 and looking like they, might be in business, Rob. But Burns really stuck to the ground game and had a good night running the football. Shelby has some key stops, but for the most part, Burns was able to run the football.
Yeah, the thing I think when I look at that Burns team, and I mentioned to the guys before we went on the air, I think the conference schedule hurt Burns more than it did Shelby. I think Shelby, with what they want to do offensively, I think Burns really hadn't been tested the way they needed to be, but they kind of shown what they are, the way they run the football. The thing is, you're playing a team as athletic as Shelby. You ran the football successfully against them. You got your other teams you're going to see come to a playoffs that you're going to run the ball against and have a chance to win.
Absolutely.
You saw a couple of big pass plays. They did. Kenyon Surratt had 2 touchdown catches, both on big third down, fourth down conversions. So Burns, we thought was pretty one-dimensional, and they really didn't throw it a lot, Coach, but when they did need to throw it, they had some big plays in the passing game.
Yeah, and they're gonna have them in these first couple of rounds also. I just think that Burns still has to hang their hat on running the football. But you're right, if you can get the play action going off of your run game, they can open up some airway for them.
Meanwhile, Tristan Tate for Shelby continued to run the ball well. He was, I think, 75 yards on 17 carries. Shelby actually was better balanced than a lot of times. I think they only had 14 pass attempts in that game, Rob.
Yeah, David, that's what I was really impressed with. And I looked at the stats from that game to see Shelby, and I've said it before, we're all blown away by those 300-yard passing nights. But when Shelby gets in the playoffs, their best teams are teams that can run the football. And that's what we saw. We're starting to see that Shelby team now. They can run the ball. And David, if I'm not mistaken, then they had some guys hurt Friday too that didn't play. So if I'm Shelby, I'm that much more excited, thankful for the week off, and I'm going to get healthy going into the first round of the playoffs with a pretty high seed.
Yeah, no question about it. Golden Lions win at 27-14. With that, they win the Southern Piedmont Conference outright, and they'll be the number 1 seed going into the playoffs. And of course, because of the extra week that we have coming up with a couple of teams, Crest and Kings Mountain, both will be playing Friday night. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But because of that, we'll know playoff seedings. Instead of finding out about it this past Saturday, we'll find out this coming weekend. Rob thinks that what he heard was it's going to be as late as Sunday afternoon before we know the playoff seedings. So we'll keep you we'll say to you to stay tuned for that. Let's go ahead and jump to the other game. Crest hosting Kings Mountain. This one not for the conference championship. South Point essentially, I guess it's for a share of the conference championship, even though South Point beat both Crest and Kings Mountain head to head. But in this game, Crest got off to an early start. And guys, we've been talking about the quarterback situation the whole time. Tyler McSwain getting the start for Crest, and Chargers scored on the opening drive to take a 7-0 lead, Coach.
Yeah, it was really impressive too. Now, there were a couple of things that missed the highlight. There was there was an interference called on a 3rd and 14 on Kings Mountain. It kept the drive alive, and then the batted ball got it going also. But you know, Crest really opened up the running game some. This is Hamrick at quarterback. Right here was a big play. The punter went down to one knee on field, and it gave a safety. Crest takes the ball, drives it down the field, and scores there. And it looks like Crest could be 1 or 2 scores away from running away with this thing.
Well, the thing that I noticed, Rob, and I know you're always taking a look at the stats, but in there we see Aiden Carson again. We've already seen 1 touchdown. He ended up 3 on the game. Only 12 carries in the ball game for Aiden Carson. The Hamrick kid that came in at quarterback ended up with 15 carries in the game. To me, that's not who you want running the football. You want Aiden Carson running the football.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Not to see him with more carries in the game would have been really. I'm like you, and again, I talked about this point of the season. I want to be able to run the football successfully. Aiden Carson's probably my best player. I want him to get the football.
Absolutely. Coach, you were pointing to turnover?
No, I was pointing to the onside kick.
Oh, the onside
kick.
kick.
Yeah, Crest goes down. Now, it is, you know, Kings Mountain's down 1 score, and they onside kick, go down and score there, and it's 24-23, 4 minutes, help me here, Rob, 4 or 5 minutes into the 3rd quarter. And there's no more scoring for either team at that point. It's 24-23, and we still have 20 minutes of game time left. So there was no scoring the rest of the 3rd or the 4th quarter whatsoever. I just thought that in the second half, which was different than the first half for Crest, was they got behind the chains. They were holding penalties. There were illegal procedure penalties. There were a lot of penalties on Crest in that second half that got them behind the chains, and it's just not that kind of defense that Kings Mountain throws at you. You got to stay in front of the chains.
Absolutely.
You got to be 2nd and 6, 3rd and 3, that type of deal to stay ahead of the chains and put yourself in a position to move the football. You can't start every drive 1st and 20.
Well, specifically speaking to the penalties, I saw a post on Facebook from Coach Lloyd basically saying 17 penalties is on me. He said,
Right.
Coaching staff will take a responsibility for not having the kids disciplined enough to have 17 penalties in a game. But Coach's point of getting behind the chains, I mean, that's fundamental football.
Yeah, it was 17-5 penalty-wise. And then I think about this game, too. How many games do you see where a team kicks off from the 7? And that's where Crest had to at one point because the penalties ended up kicking. Well, it was actually the Kings Mountain's first score, I believe, led to their first score was Crest kicking off from the 7-yard line. So a lot of self-inflicted wounds for Crest against a good football team. You just can't play that way against good football teams and expect to come out with a win.
Absolutely. Well, 24-23 the final. Kings Mountain the big win, and now that puts Kings Mountain in the solidly now in the 2nd position out of the Big South. South Point again will get the 1 seed. Kings Mountain will get the 2. Crest drops down to the 3. And Coach, what does that mean in terms of we'll see that Friday night? I mean, you got Crest against Stuart Kramer, you got Kings Mountain against North Gaston. Both of those games were the makeup from the hurricane week.
Right.
Don't expect either team to have a hiccup on Friday night against either one of those two. So for the most part, the seedings are set. What does that mean for Crest going in as a 3rd seed out of the Big South?
Yeah, well, and Rob will probably explain this a lot better than I will going into our 2nd segment when we're moving forward some of it. But what it means is after they seed the 1s, after you take all the conference champions and you seed those using their RPIs, then Everybody else, from 10 all the way down to 32, are seated completely on the RPI. So even though Kings Mountain beat Crest head-to-head, because it wasn't in the conference champion mix, that means that it goes to the RPI, and Crest has got a stronger RPI.
Okay.
So Crest is probably going to go in. I've seen some projections at a 10, and Kings Mountain a 13. And I know that, they're sitting there going, especially Kings Mountain faithful, are sitting there going, how is that going to happen in head-to-head? But after you see the conference champions, it is strictly RPI. And with Charlotte Catholic win and a couple of other wins against conference champions, Shelby being one of them, Charlotte Catholic being one of them, their RPIs are really high. That keeps Crest RPIs up.
Well, and Rob, that's something that they haven't always done in the past.
It used to be they seeded the ones, then seeded the twos, and then it was all wild cards.
Right.
They made that change where everybody seeded after the ones a couple years ago. The key game between these two schools was Kings Mountain playing Cox Mill and Crest playing Catholic.
Yeah.
That's the big difference, because even losing that game last night, Crest is still number 1 RPI overall in the West. The games this week, and we'll get into it, actually could end up hurting Kings Mountain and Crest because the records are so bad for both those teams. I don't think it's going to be enough to mess with the seedings much, but it is going to be enough to where it will impact, maybe the top, when you look at a team like Irwin playing AC Reynolds, teams like that, maybe playing for a 2, that's where it's going to have the most impact.
All right, so we got a little bit more that we can talk about on that when we come back. We'll talk about those 2 games that Crest and Kings Mountain will be making up from the Hurricane Week, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the playoffs as well as college and pro. We'll do all that when we come back. You're watching Armchair Quarterback.
She gets her hair from her mom, her eyes from her dad, and her drugs from her home medicine cabinet. Fact: more people die from drug overdoses than from car crashes or gun violence. And over 50% of those deaths are from prescription drugs. Prescription drug abuse is preventable. 1. Secure and take regular inventory of our medications. 2. Dispose of unused or expired medications. 3. Share this message with others. Be aware, don't share, lock your meds.
Cakes and cookies, toys and gifts, Christmas at your fingertips.
It's the shopping event of the season, the Southern Christmas Show, November 14th through 24th at the Park Expo and Conference Center. Celebrate the 12 days of Christmas, a countdown of Yuletide cheer brimming with festive decor and seasonal magic. Buy tickets at southernchristmasshow.com.
Let's go to the Southern Christmas Show.
Welcome back in to Armchair Quarterback. I'm David Allen, joined as always by Coach Guy Suttle and Rob Roop. Each week we talk about our teams from Cleveland County. We did a good bit of that in the first segment. Let's do a little bit more of that. First of all, we got those makeup games from the Hurricane Week that, now remember, Burns was open that week and Shelby ended up playing Thomas Jefferson on Wednesday night before any of the rain came. Kings Mountain was due to play North Gaston on Thursday night, but the rains came quicker than we expected, so they didn't get their game in. Crest and Stuart Kramer were trying to hold on to Stuart Kramer having homecoming, so they never even made a change on that game, and then they decided, well, we'll play it Monday, and of course, nobody knew what was happening with that hurricane, and we had all trees down and power out and didn't go to school for a week. So those are the 2 games. Let's start with Crest at Stuart Kramer. Rob, this is not a game that we should have any concerns about, but at the same time, it's a different atmosphere than what we had expected this week of the year.
I understand this game has actually been moved to Thursday. They're going to play 7 o'clock Thursday from what I understand. And like you said, it just has a weird feel to it. I think it's a benefit to Crest coming out of that game against Kings Mountain. What they do in practice this week, knowing some things they got to work on. My biggest concern about playing at Kramer, and I've seen it before from different teams, that turf gets kind of funky down there. They got artificial turf, and I've seen some kids go down with some things, so you got to be careful. Just get out of that game healthy. But Crest knows they got things to work on. Again, I think, no concern. I feel like anybody can beat anybody, but I think would be a huge disaster for Crest to lose this game. Again, we talked about how it would impact the seeding. I don't think it will. It could actually drop Crest a little bit in the RPI, but I don't think it'll hurt their overall seed come playoff time.
Yeah, talking about that turf, I think when Kings Mountain played down there was a section of that turf that had come unattached, if you will, and so it had
Yes.
bubbled up enough that even the lines weren't straight. It kind of looked like, I won't mention, maybe Coach Suttle was painting the lines. But Coach, obviously, this is it's a must-win, obviously, for both of them. But it's also not it's not a game that you would expect to be close in the fourth quarter.
No, and going into Rob's explanation of, I think Crest will be working on things. I think Crest is going to be working an awful lot on Crest. I'll go ahead and say, I will be surprised if Crest has more than 3, 4, maybe even at the most 5 penalties. I think that and it's a great game for Crest in that, hey, we've got a chance to go out there and play some competition and work on things. And job one is we're going to play a clean ball game. No turnovers. Everybody's going to be playing heads up. No holding penalties. No whatever penalties. So I think that it's going to be a good game for Crest to have, just so they can clean everything up. It's going to be a spirited week of practice for Coach Lloyd, and things are going to get straightened out. There's going to be some things that a lot of sweeping going on.
Rob, do we have a decision at quarterback? McSwain started the game, but obviously only played sparingly early, and then it was Hamrick most of the rest of the game.
I think the decision's been made. I think it is Hamrick. I think you saw McSwain start. It was senior night, had been your starter, had started up to that point. But I still think when you look at crunch time, 0 was the guy that was in the game and not 3. So I think they've kind of moved that direction with Eli Hamrick. The thing I like about McSwain, and Coach Suttle even mentioned, he can be used in so many other ways. He's such a good athlete. So I'm hoping we see him involved in different things in the offense if he's not going to be a quarterback. But I think maybe Eli Hamrick is now the starter for Crest.
All right, 2 weeks in a row now, Kings Mountain will get former coaches. Obviously, former coach Greg Lloyd, head coach. This week, it'll be former coach Darrell Wilson, who is the head coach now at North Gaston. Coach Wilson was the DC at Kings Mountain for a long time, coach. And, this is a game very similar to Crest Stuart Kramer. We don't expect this game to be close in the fourth quarter, but it's an opportunity. Kings Mountain ran the ball well against Crest on Friday night, but the pass game sputtered a little bit. So this might be an opportunity for them to work on that.
Yeah, and I think Coach Aaron will probably script maybe his play calling, for at least a quarter or so, and maybe even longer than that there's going to be a certain amount of balance, there's a certain amount of run, play action, drop back pass. And just run that script, and against North Gaston you probably can. And like I say, work on some things they had a few breakdowns on. They certainly off tackle. Aiden Carson got some tremendous runs off tackle. That's some things you're going to have to clean up. You got to get those linebackers over the top just to make sure that you don't get that off tackle 25-yard scoring play.
Yeah.
And for me, if I'm Coach Kings Mountain, I'm glad to have a game after the Crest game so I can get my kids off of the high, because the high emotion of winning that game, I can get refocused with another team, like you said, I feel like I can handle before I get into the playoffs. So that's what I like about having another game now. Let's get ourselves back composed. Let's get back to who we are, be who we want to be, because if we do that, we know we're going to be successful in the playoffs. Again, a game that I don't think is going to bother Kings Mountain's position in the RPI. A lot of people, and that's why I can't figure out with the state why it takes so long for them to do the brackets, because there's so many people that now can prognosticate these things out. Looks like Kings Mountain is usually pretty close. Kings Mountain at about a 13. And we talk about flaws with the seeding process, and I think Kings Mountain has a complaint, that they could be seeded lower than Crest. You look at the way the brackets look right now with what they're saying could happen. If it holds as we're seeing, one half of the bracket will include South Point, West Charlotte, Statesville, Hickory, Dudley, and Kings Mountain, all in one half of the bracket. Similar to what happened to Crest last year, as the number 1 seed, they actually had the tougher road than the lower half of the bracket. They could be the complete opposite this year. Crest could have, per se, an easier road when you look at the top part of the state, compared to what the top half will be. That's a lot of good teams have to play each other, and you're going to have to really battle to get out of that half of the bracket.
It will definitely be interesting, no question about that. So again, the lineup for this week, you see Shelby and Burns not on there, Crest at Stuart Kramer, Kings Mountain and North Gaston. Both those games make up from that last week of September. Again, it's hard to know what Shelby and Burns, you don't normally have a week off going into the playoffs. Some years, if you're beat up and battered, it might be great to have that week off. So it'll be interesting to see how those two teams handle it as they prepare now for moving into the 2A playoffs. Let's go ahead and switch gears a little bit and talk about a little bit of college football. Gardner-Webb with a win over Charleston Southern over the weekend, 17-14. Hey, any win's a good win, Coach. We'll take it if you're Gardner-Webb.
Absolutely, and that's a close enough game that is a recruiting game. That is a game that hey, when you go in there or you win 17-14, that will help you in recruiting down the road because you're going after the same athletes in these states. So, good win for Gardner-Webb.
Absolutely. Looking at the national scene, some movement in the polls today. Penn State with the loss to Ohio State only dropped from 3 to 6. I think they're probably still in a pretty good position to make a run at the playoffs. Clemson with a bad loss, in my opinion, to Louisville drops them. I think they dropped all the way down to like 19th. So I'm not sure Clemson will factor in the playoff at all because it looks like Miami's going to be the champion out of the ACC. But, of course, anything can still happen with all of that. Rob, I'm saying my dark horse pick for this whole thing is Indiana. I cannot believe Indiana has never been good at football in my lifetime. Bobby Knight back in the day, they were great in basketball, but football, they have been mediocre at best for 56 years, and as far as I can tell you. Indiana is up to number 8 in the poll. They're undefeated. They got Michigan Saturday. It's really their first big-time opponent in the Big Ten. I don't know. What do you think?
Coming to Indiana. The SIG has got them playing well. SIG and Eddie, a great coach for Indiana. So I think you keep an eye on them. And BYU, they could be the fly in the ointment when it comes to this playoff system. Talk about the ACC. With Clemson getting beat, I think that's going to eliminate maybe a second ACC team unless SMU beats Miami in the ACC championship game. If that happens, I think Miami still gets in, and SMU, of course, gets in as the automatic.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to take that victory for SMU, and could happen. Miami's defense
is atrocious.
They've got some problems.
They're atrocious on defense. They gave up 30-something points to Duke, and, I mean, they scored 53, but they still.
Yeah. We were talking about cleaning up things in the this week for Kings Mountain and Crest, cleaning up a lot of mistakes and things. Miami has got to clean up. They've got to figure out a way to start stopping people because they look very impressive on offense, and that's the highlights of them. You don't see a lot of highlights involving their defense, whether it's an interception, whether it's a caused fumble. It's nothing. I mean, it is nothing. So, yeah, there's a lot of cleaning up between now and the ACC championship for Miami.
All right, well, that's the college wrap. Although my Heels, what happened? 2 weeks in a row, they've just beaten the brakes off somebody. So good, go Carolina. Let's move on to the pros because, I mean, if you're a Panthers fan, and there's a lot of you in this area watching this broadcast, you've been looking for something to grab a hold of and maybe just get a little bit of excitement. Maybe that was yesterday. New Orleans is a train wreck, I understand. They look like the best team in the NFL for 2 weeks and then have lost 7 games in a row, and Dennis Allen got fired today. That's what happens to you. You get beat by the Panthers. Dennis Allen, the head coach for the Saints, got fired today. But, Rob, there was a little something yesterday with the young receivers and Bryce Young and Chuba Hubbard on offense that gives you a little bit of hope.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's the thing you look for right now. Is you're thinking, okay, we got some things happening. I guess my thing there is I know I'm not going anywhere. Once again, I'm going to mess myself out of a top pick and somebody else is going to get it ahead of me. But I think we're finally starting to see, as you said, some growth out of this offense, and that's a positive. But again, I still look at that New Orleans team, and they're just bad right now. So, I mean, it's, those are the teams, you better beat teams like that at home. in the NFL.
Absolutely, Coach.
But you know, the Saints drilled the Panthers first game of the year.
Absolutely.
So
Right,
that
right.
shows you, was it 47-10
Yeah,
or
it was
something like
terrible.
that? And so that shows you where the Saints have gone to and where Carolina has made it back to. Believe it or not, I'm going to say this. The offensive line looked pretty good yesterday.
did.
Defense looked good. Bryce Young looked good. The receivers looked good. Were they playing a 2-win team versus a 1-win team? Yes. But it did look promising, and that shows you where the Saints were at the beginning of the season and where they are now.
Well, the national media, I've just had a fit. Get Up this morning, it's an ESPN show with Mike Greenberg, spent the first 15 minutes talking about the Dallas Cowboys losing again yesterday. That's fine. But my goodness, there are some really good stories happening in the NFL right now. The Detroit Lions have, again, one of those teams that has been bad almost my entire life. They came a play or two from going to the Super Bowl last year. In the rain and Lambeau Field yesterday, they hammered the Packers. The Lions are a legit Super Bowl contender, Rob.
And I tell you what, you want to talk about a team that's doing some things differently offensively. You watch how they run their offense and the things they do, the way they use motion, the way they try to get the eyes moving on defense. They are a really good football team and fun to watch. And if that road has to go through Detroit, you talk about a madhouse come playoff time,
Yeah.
that's going to be a phenomenal environment.
And I think don't sleep on the Los Angeles Rams either. I'm not a Rams fan by any means, but they look like the Saints a couple of weeks ago, and they have gotten some guys back from injury. Puka Nakua's back, Cooper Kupp's back. I think Kyron Williams has been phenomenal and out of the backfield. I think they're a team that can still put something together out there in the NFC West, especially with the San Francisco 49ers struggling, and they continue to struggle.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm about to say that division looks like nobody really wants to win it. So somebody
Yeah.
has to win it. Who wants to be the one? The thing that surprised me as I continue to watch these teams play, you think about the Baltimore Ravens and how good they've always been defensively. Their secondary is bad right now. You want to talk about a team you can throw the football on, it's the Baltimore Ravens.
You're exactly right, but Guy, they can play some offense.
They sure can, and they are a lot of fun to watch. I mean, it's between them and, believe it or not, between them and Kansas City's offense, it's just fun. It's just fun to watch them put the points on the board. Shout out to Jonathan Bullard. The Minnesota Vikings won last night, 21-13. So it's always good to see number 90 on the field.
Absolutely. So Monday Night Football tonight, it's got the Kansas City Chiefs in action. They have been kind of, Coach, I think he's talking about 3 years ago, Kansas City offense, because this year's offense, Patrick Mahomes has thrown 8 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. So not really setting the world on fire, but they're undefeated, and they got a chance to stay undefeated tonight on Monday Night Football. So that's our look at the pros. Again, a little bit of hope for the Carolina Panthers. We're going to all cling to that at least until they get beat 40-0 next week. We'll see how it goes. And they're going to Germany, too, to play the Giants.
Oh, yeah, the hell.
So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hey, that's all the time we have for this week. Join us next week right here on Armchair Quarterback.